was going to start out just really easily, Anna, when do you switch from founder-driven sales to hiring your first sales team? And what kind of advice do you have for people that might be thinking about doing that?
It's a great place to start. It's the million-dollar question, the multi-million-dollar question. And I think it's that first big chapter of change. And when I think about how do we go through that, first, I should say we all make mistakes through that chapter of growth, and that's just such a big transition because we're usually the ones selling as founders until some point where we need to scale the team. The one thing I would say in terms of who we're looking for during that transition, it's really, I like to think about it as it's dependent on the founder and what, the founder's natural inclinations and where they want to play in the business, because you have founders who love sales and they want to be part of that and very close to that. And then you have other founders who are begrudgingly the first, sales team. And so the kinds of people we want to build and the pieces of the puzzle that we look for really depend on what does the founder want and what involvement do they want to have in sales. And that really informs who we're looking for. Because if you're a founder who was selling and now you're going to lead the sales team, you need different kinds of people that you're going to hand it off to salesperson number one, and you really don't want to be involved. So I think it's important to get very real as a founder or a small founding team of like, what is your point of view on how you're going to grow this team, and where do what are your strengths and areas and gaps you want to fill with your team. But then in terms of, I'll say that. And then in terms of like, when is it time? Also really unique to each business and each founding team, because I think there's a point that we get the ball rolling and either we're not good enough at it and we know that this is not our strength, so we need to bring in others, and that's a moment to say it's time. I'm actually inhibiting our growth here, or I'm just not good enough at this. But also when we're killing it and we say, wow, I see here a world where I can add in some people and I can significantly grow. So you have to look at those points of, it's different for every business and it's different for every founder or founding team. But I don't know, Brian or Derek, what your thoughts are.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. I love that. It's first big chapter of change. And even when the point comes when the founder has to go make the first sales hire and kind of take a step back from being 100% sales focused, as a sales leader, I still love the founder in the market, in the field with me. I mean, talking about selling from the heart, you can't get the more raw emotion and belief and passion behind the solution and their storytelling than having the founder there. So, I know a lot of times with founders, when they make that move, they feel like either one or two paths. They still on day-to-day drive sales, so they sometimes can get in the way of the salespeople and not give them the autonomy and really the coaching and transferring that knowledge. And then other times they take a step too far back where, the answer is usually in the middle. Love having them out in the marketplace. But I find also that a lot of times they focus on the first sales hire is, we need to hire a head of sales or VP of sales. And you really shouldn't hire a head of sales or VP of sales until you're ready to scale, build, and fund the whole sales team. I mean, sometimes you can make even smaller steps where maybe as a founder, you're great at closing, and your first hire could be an SDR, someone who just creates more leads, qualifies the leads, sets the appointments, and then puts you in position of what one of your native geniuses are and really close. Or on the flip side, it could be you have a strong network and you have all these opportunities that are stuck in the exact same sales stage and not moving along. So you need to go find a well-experienced consultative salesperson and bring them in. But even if you bring one sales rep in, I tend to believe that when you're doing something new, start with two. So
for sure,
if you just hire one and they are very successful, you don't know if it's because of them. If they're not successful, you still don't know if it's because of them. Is it product fit? Is the product being pulled at a rapid pace? Or is there other issues, or is there sales? But when you start with two, you can get it pretty quickly. You get good feedback mechanisms on whether it's product fit, support, the sales rep, your early sales process, and kind of the system you're trying to put in place. So I think there's many paths you can go, but I wouldn't start by, we need to get that head of sales, we need that person, and then go build the rest of the team if you're not ready to completely scale, build, and fund the team.
Yeah, I will say on this, hire two, I feel pretty emphatic about that one, to the point, you have a lot of founders who will say, well, I don't have the budget for two. And my answer is always like, you have to go find the budget. Like, it's that critical, because to your point, you don't know what's working and what's not. Is that first rep floundering around because of something that we're doing in our messaging, our positioning, our pricing, or is it, their skill? And it's really hard to, it's such an ambiguous chapter when transition and start to build out sales, no matter what. In the best of cases, it's ambiguous. And when you just have one person doing it, it's really murky, what's working, what's not, and what the causes are. So I'm with you on that for sure.
I think
Yeah,
that's,
I think similarly though, first off, I think most founders wait too long. I know I'm like grossly generalizing, but I think more often than not, they wait too long. And that's completely understandable, particularly for those who like doing it and like being in the field and like the rush that comes with being in the market. And the same issue that comes with only hiring one rep versus hiring two, because I am absolutely double exclamation points next to the recommendation to hire two. The same issue holds though, which is until you hire two, you may be closing deals based on the charm, passion, and charisma of the founder. And then there's a huge drop off, whether you hire one more, two more, or three more. And so that can become a real confounder. So I guess to summarize, I agree with Anna and Brian on this. My summary is hire two and do it sooner than you think.
yeah, I think that's great advice. Oh, Anna, if you were going to.
No, I love that. And I just wanted to point out too, to your point, this might happen if you really have a founder who loves sales, who's going to stay involved. You might have multiple versions of this. I'm working with a company right now. They've got a sales team off to, it's an engine, it's humming along great, but they're about to take a new product to market. And the CEO is the point on that spear, right? He's out making that happen. And what I realized recently in counseling him is, he's the only one who's going to know how to sell it. I said, we've got to get two people attached to you right now so that everybody can, they can learn to sell it and bring that back into the organization. So it's the same thing, Derek. He was about to kind of go off and spend the next 9 months doing this. And then we built no institutional knowledge, nothing repeatable. We just have a founder who knows how to sell a new product. So I totally echo that.
Yeah, I think the founder always gets a bump in terms of sales because they believe in the product so much. And anyone you hire, no matter how good they are, doesn't have that track record of experience of really deeply understanding the problem space, the client, and really empathizing and being compassionate for their customer. So I always refer to it as like the founder bump, right? A founder can often have 20 or 30% bump in close rate, especially right at the beginning, and your job as someone who's just maybe hit 1 million ARR or 100, even a couple 100,000 ARR, reproducible and scalable are the buzzwords, right? And oftentimes, you have to kind of go the other way and take that risk. And even though your close rates might go down a little bit, you might have to come in and rescue something because, yeah, they're not going to be as good as you. That's just the way it is. But there's only one you. And if you want to have $100 million or $1 billion business, it's not going to be you doing $1 billion in sales yourself. So you got to get out of that mindset. So one of the common questions that I wanted to ask and common things that we deal with is, when does the founder start to get in their own way? And you dealt with that a little bit, but maybe we can talk a little bit more, starting with Derek, about, are there classic signs that you've seen in companies you've worked with where, it's just a sign, a sort of a smell in the room that like the founder needs to step back and focus a little bit more working on the business instead of in the business?
Yeah, I mean, I think we already hit on the key symptom for that diagnosis, which is not building up people who are self-sufficient and capable and able to then scale the business. And so, when I advise CEOs, part of that relationship is a quarterly assessment of how they're spending their time based on where the company is in its development and maturation. And too often, what they're doing when the company's at a stage where it doesn't even know its product market fit yet, and what they're doing 2 years later when they should be scaling. When you dissect that founder's allocation of time, it looks way more similar than it should, with those 2 years and that, huge evolution in between. And so but it's natural, right? You have to be intentional about changing focus areas and time, and where you as a founder choose to spend your energy and your talents. That has to be continuously changing, and that's much easier said than done. So without giving specific answers on it, I would just say, like, be intentional and watch yourself on it. And if you have someone who can help you do a sober assessment of that on a regular basis, I think that's a really helpful and healthy thing.
It's a great time to say advisors, right? Like, your advisor, you need good advisors if you're going to do this. You can't be making these decisions alone, because the default is to do the exact same thing you've always done, which you're good at probably by now, right? Any thoughts there, Anna?
Well, yeah, I think, advisors help you take a more objective look, and that's really hard to do. So especially if advisors who've been there, done that, skinned to their knees, they're going to often say the hard things or point out the obvious things that, we're turning a blind eye to. I think, too, to echo Derek's point, the best leaders that I know have a high degree of self-awareness. And am I getting in the way of this, or am I limiting growth? That comes from self-awareness and being, just having that. So I always say to people that, maybe aren't as strong in self-awareness, it's like really helpful to intentionally build that. And I think that's just something that's, really important as we scale the business across all areas, is to be really objective with ourselves. But I also think that in terms of when is it time, or, when is the founder getting in the way, if I'm generalizing, almost always we're getting on our own way as founders, right? Like, we're not always going to get the best people we can in the door. We're not making, some certain decisions that might be a little bit risky. To hire 2 people is a little more risky than one. When you're a founder thinking about, the cash, but it's from my view as an external advisor, it's far less risky. So I think that this is where we have to have these, like, real conversations about, and have people that help us hold ourselves accountable.
I love the quote, the founder's always getting in their own way. It's fair. It's been true in my experience, for sure. So we only have a few more minutes, or a minute left on this topic. One of the questions I did really want to get to is, how do you know you've made a mistake? So I think, an early advisor of mine told me the worst salesperson can sell themselves. How do you know, in that ambiguous cloud, is this my process, or did I just hire the wrong people? And let's start with Brian.
Yeah, right before I jump into that, my thoughts on that answer. I mean, I was listening to Anna and Derek, and I just kept thinking, surrender the results, surrender control, right? Have autonomy, surrender. And I think when you do, and you are taking the pulse of your hire and the teams to know when you make a mistake, I think it starts when you see that they're not coachable and there is an alignment, because you've created, even though your system may have not been refined, and you really haven't had that knowledge transfer on how to win with the solution and the storytelling, the problems you're solving, but you're trying to transfer that in your early days of building the systems and processes. It's a lot of times when you find that hire is not coachable or adaptable to learn and do things a different way. And they feel that they have their map or game plan, that this is the way that has to be done, because it really has to be a partnership. That first hire, it's kind of like your work spouse, right? I mean, you're spending all that time on the road. You have to be able to bounce things off each other and be open-minded and adaptable to learn new things and do things differently. And if they're not coachable, that's my first telltale sign that you could have a problem.
Yeah, I think that new hire needs to match the founder's energy as well. Right?
Yeah.
They have to be almost a mirror of the founder, because if they're not that passionate, the first few hires, they have a lot to carry on their shoulders, right? Including a sales process that doesn't exist. Yep. So Derek, any thoughts there?
Well, I think that last point's an important one. Where I've made mistakes with the first hire is not recognizing that the first hire, I've hired people a second time who previously have been great 5th or 6th hires for me. But by the time you're the 5th or 6th sales hire, there is a playbook, there is a process, there is a track record, and the person thrived. And then you bring them in as the first hire, and it requires a whole different set of skills. And like Brian said, adaptability, coachability, curiosity, durability. And the last 2 commercial hires I've made are recovering while they're doing sales. They're recovering product managers, because part of what they need to do in the market is figure out product market fit and be able to flex with the audience in a way that a product manager does. And they've been very successful, I think, in ways that traditional salespeople would not, because there isn't a playbook. And you gotta hire people who can roll with that. And that is not for the faint of heart.
I love that you mentioned this, because one of the probably my most frequent talk tracks through the week is talking to founders about the difference between people who create the playbook and people who run the playbook. And you need both, but you have to be really clear. Do I need somebody to run the playbook, or do I need somebody to create the playbook? Because there's not as much crossover as you would think, right? Your 5th or 6th hire, you think, well, they're great at with being early stage. They've lived through ambiguity, like they know what it's like, but they were running a playbook versus creating one. And I think that's such an important. If I look at hiring mistakes, that's usually one of the most common ones. Is we got a builder and we needed somebody to just run it, or vice versa. And Dustin, to your question about like, how do we know if we made the wrong hire? This is one of the hardest things when sales, and usually you see the founders will fire too early or not early enough. And because we kind of hang out in this gray area of like, is this person doing a good job or not? And I think that this is actually so much simpler than we make it, because it feels gray when you're living it and you're working with that person every day. But number one is, I do like to say, trust your gut. If your gut is saying something, like 9 times out of 10, the founder's gut on this, if this hire is right or not, is like, they know, they just don't want to maybe hear what the gut is saying. But to me, this is very black and white. Before any early sales hires, I love to make activities and outcomes expectations for 30, 60, 90 days. And if anybody's in this position right now, email me, I will send you a template, an example. But I like to say, like, here are the activities I'm expecting over 30, 60, 90, and here are the outcomes I'm expecting. I might not know, right? I don't know how to set a quota if it's really the first salesperson. I don't know how many calls it's going to take to create an opportunity, but I can set some expectations, and then at least I'm having like quantifiable conversations versus just like nebulous conversations. And I can say, okay, well, I thought it was going to take 100 calls to get 10 opportunities. It's actually taking 200, but at least now we're talking about that stuff. So I think these things are really important to do. And in a truly ambiguous way, when we don't even know how to do activities and outcomes, that's part of what I'll ask the sales hire number 1 to do, right? Give me back your activities and your expected outcomes so we can be talking about it every week. So either way, I think it's really important to have these things on paper, because that's how it helps us make the hard call if we did make the wrong hire. It helps us see it earlier.
Yeah. An important thing there is you want to share those with the person and get buy-in from them. So if they don't think they're realistic, then they're just going to be rolling their eyes through those meetings. And you really want to invite them to have a conversation with you, because you're pulling these numbers out of maybe your experience, and they might not be the best way to measure this hire. Either they're going to overperform or underperform. But the key there is measure. And that helps cut through that initial, maybe we need to get rid of this person. Well, if their numbers aren't where they need to be, it makes that conversation so much easier. Letting people go, especially as a founder, or in an early stage business, one of the hardest things you can do. And so having a conversation around these metrics aren't where they should be, and giving them some time to fix them on a 3 or 30 day, 60 day, 90 day window, sets you up for that conversation on 90 days. And that's really important, because it makes that conversation emotionally easier for you to handle as well. If they're underperforming, it gives you kind of a release valve for that. So very, very good advice.